Yesterday, we learned the Mishnah on Daf Mem Omid Beis that opens up the the third parak of Avoda Zara Kolat Slomim, and we're up to the Gemara that we started yesterday, and we'll review that Gemara. The Mishnah records a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim and the Rabbanim. The question that's being addressed is, how do we know whether a certain image has been worshipped as an idol? And Rabbi Meir tells us that in his Gegen, in his area, these images were worshipped at least one time annually. And it could be that Rabbi Meir goes from his location to all other locations, meaning that Rabbi Meir is going to have to make a gzera that other locations, their images, if we allow them, if we permit them, which means that you're allowed to benefit from them, then we're afraid they may come to permit even images in my area, which are worshipped once a year. The Chachamim, on the other hand, rejected Rabbi Meir because, number one, they're not sure that it's definite that the images were worshipped once a year. That's not definite, although probability seems to indicate that that is the case, but that statistical probability apparently is a mute. It's less than 50%. And here we have a controversy between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham about whether chayshina lemiuta. For example, Rabbi Meir, in the case of Yibum, when a woman falls for Yibum, Rabbi Meir is choshesh that maybe she's an islandess and incapable of maturity and producing children, and therefore the original marriage to the first husband is null and void. And we'll only find out later. If the original marriage is null and void, then this Yavam is not a Yavam at all. It's Eishes Ach, and that's an Erev. So a Meir is only agreeable to permit Yibum in a case where we know for 100% sure that she's not an islandess. And the same is true with regard to the Yavam. With regard to the mess, that we have to know that he wasn't a Saris. Because again, he died childless. So that's the Shita Rabbi Meir, all over Shas, that Chayshin L'miyuta, we're always worried about a minority. The Chacham, on the other hand, are not worried about a minority. So the Chachamim are looking for a case where we know for sure that this image was worshipped. Then and only then will that image be Asur Ba'ano, under the law of Lo Yidbak B'Yodcha Me'umah Ben Acherim, that Avodah Zara is Asur Ba'ano, you can't benefit from it, you can't sell it. And the Chacham say that in order to guarantee that that image was indeed worshipped, we need to see some action that was done by the idolaters to give respect and honor to this image. And if they put things in the hand of the image, like the Mishnah gives three examples of Makel, Tzipar, and Kadur, which the Gemara is going to explain, then we know for sure that these images were worshipped, and then they're Asur Ba'ano. So that's just a little bit of introduction to today's daf. again, we're going to get into a question of a controversy between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. That's going to be the main part of the today's daf, and that has to do with cases where we have reason to suspect that the idolater was mevatel the avodah zarah. So that's called bittul, and that's going to lead us to what's called a svek. So we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that you don't have to convince yourself that this image was worshipped because it has one of these three items in its hand, but any item that was put in its hand, we'll see how far Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is willing to go with that, is indicative of the fact that this was worshipped. The Gemara then, as we saw yesterday, asks why the Rabbanan are mekil and they permit benefiting from this image. After all, Reb Meir makes a very great case that they would worship this image once a year. Now, I don't know how detailed we have to get here, and we only have a certain limit amount of time, but let me just say this. The idea that the image is worshipped once annually is based on the movement of the sun. And every image that was created for the purpose of idolatry has a certain day in the year, in the calendar year, which is designated for that image because of the position of the sun on that calendar date. And that calendar date indicates that this particular image is connected to the higher powers above and is located down here on earth in order to control the world. So every image has its, we'll call it a birthday, meaning its special day. So again, that's a long discussion on its own, but just to put things into a little perspective. So the Gemara now asks, why did the Rabbanan permit this, benefiting from this image? After all, once a year, the image has its heyday on that special day, and it's worshipped. So the Gemara says that we don't really know for sure that this calendar date already passed and that this image was already worshipped. And in all likelihood, if it's like a newish looking image, probably it wasn't worshipped. That special day didn't come about. But Rabbi Meir is choshesh l'miyut, even though we have reason to believe in all likelihood that it was not worshipped, but there's still a possibility that it was worshipped. And Rabbi Meir, as a matter of his universal opinion, all over Shas, he holds that we have to be choshesh for the miyut. Now, the Gemara that we're going to learn today, before we get to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, which was the main issue, is going to whittle down and restrict Rabbi Meir's chumrah. So let's take a look at Omar Rabbi Yehuda Omar Shmuel. That's where we'll start on the bottom of Daf Memam and Beis, 2 lines up from the bottom. Be'andartere shel malachim shaninu. When does Rabbi Meir derive from circumstances the indication that this image was worshipped? That's only if there was a king, and after his death, they created an image that's meant to look like the king, and in order to show their veneration for the king, they would worship that image. So that's Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul. Now we have Rabbi Bar Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, further whittling down and restricting the Gumra, the stringency of Rabbi Meir, ubi omdim al Pesach Medina shanui. It's only because they place that image at the entrance into the city. Now, the word Medina means city. That's a discussion on its own. In many places in Shas, the word Medina means a city, an ear. And there's an entranceway, a main entranceway into the city. And that's where they put the image. And that indicates that there's a very good chance that they will, with the passage of time, worship that image in deference to the king that passed away, the late king. So to summarize, we have now two conditions that have to be met in order for Rabbi Meir's chumrah to apply. Number one, we're only dealing with the image of a king. And number two, the image of the king was located at the entrance to the city. And now we start today's daf. Daf Memal. Omar Rabbah. Rabbah is going to go a step further and claim that there's another restriction in the chumrah of Rabbi Meir, and that is machlokes shel kfarim. Rabbi Meir's chumrah, to assume that this image was worshipped and therefore it's asur, but I know you can't get any benefit, it only applies in the smaller villages, but not in the great metropolis. Aval b'shel krachim, in the great metropolis, divrei hakol mutara, my time l'noi avdule. So now the Gemara is introducing, in the name of Rabbah, a whole different perspective to everything that we've been talking about. And that is that it was quite common to create these images, not for purposes of worshiping the images, but because they are objects of beauty, they are artistic. So, for example, gentlemen, if you've ever been to a museum of, let's say, an art museum or even natural history, you'll see various busts of, Greek leaders and so forth and so on. Some of these busts are thousands of years old. And you wonder whether they worshiped these busts or they were objects of beauty. So you can go to a museum and see many figures that are not necessarily former idols that were worshipped, but were created for aesthetic purposes. And herein, says Rabbah, lies the difference, according to Rabbi Meir at least, between villages and the metropolis. In the metropolis, I guess these are high civilized, the high part of civilization. They would make these images for purposes of beauty. They would adorn their homes and other places. So therefore it was never worshipped. That's in the city. And even Rabbi Meir's chumrah is only in the villages where the people were not so sophisticated, and they didn't create these objects of art and beauty. And these images were therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, in many cases, were objects of worship and Avoda Zara. So the Gemara objects. Now you're telling me that even Rabbi Meir agrees to Rabbanon that in the cities we have a right to be makil and permit benefiting because we assume they were created for artistic purposes. But then the machlokas between Chachamim and Rabbi Meir revolves around the kfarim, the villages. But the kfarim vadai lemiflechinu avdi lahu. The villagers did not create images for beauty and as objects of art, and therefore there's no question that they created these images for purpose of worship. How then could it be possible that there are Rabbanan on Mekil? In other words, on the one hand, we want to focus on Rabbi Meir and understand how to limit Rabbi Meir's chumrah, but on the other hand, if we limit Rabbi Meir's chumrah too much, then you get to a point where Rabbi Meir's chumrah is like Dover Pasha, there's no one who could argue against it, and therefore we don't understand the Rabbanan's Kula. Eli Yitmar Hachi Yitmar. So now we have to reformulate Rabba's statement. Omer Rav Machlokas b'shel Krachim, Aval b'shel Kfarim, Divrei Kol Asurim. Even the Rabbana will agree that in the small villages, the images were created for the purpose of idolatry, and they have to be osur. Where did the Rabbana disagree with Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir went as far as to say that even in the cities, we have to be worried about those few cases, the miut, the minority, in which they created the images and they worshiped the images. Whereas Rabbanan say, look, the preponderant majority of these images were created for artistic purposes. And therefore, we don't have to be choshesh for the miut. So the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Chacham revolves around the question of whether we're choshesh for miut. Now, the only thing that we haven't discussed here, which is a major chunk in the sugya, as we're about to go on, is the gzera that I mentioned at the outset. Do we assume that in this location of Rabbi Meir, since the minority of people worshipped that image, and therefore we have to be choshesh and we asma, no, therefore we should go a step further and make a gzera throughout the entire world to prohibit hana from any images anywhere in the world, atu, because we're afraid that they'll come to worship the images in this area of Rabbi Meir. And that too is the subject of the controversy between the Chacham and Rabbi Meir. The Chacham are not going to accept such a gzera that we should worry about images elsewhere on the face of the earth, atu, images in this area, because even images in this area, really, it's only a matter of being choshesh for miut. However, it could be that Rabbi Meir, if you know 100% sure that this image was never worshipped, then it could be that it's mutar ba'no. Oh, let's go on. Now, the Chachamim say that although we're not choshesh from miut, and we don't assume that this image was worshipped, therefore it's mutar ba'no. However, if the image is holding in its hand, they put into its hand one of three symbols, then we assume it was worshipped. Makel is the staff. What's the meaning of the staff? Sherodes atzmo tachas kol ha'olam kulo kemakel. Again, the Gemara uses a pejorative term, because whenever the Gemara talks about Avoda Zara, it always formulates it in pejorative terms, as if the entire world is like a makil over this idol. Meaning the idol is meaningless. But really, in truth, what the Gemara has in mind here is that the idol has the makil, which indicates its dominion over the entire world. Tzipor, shetofes esatzmo tachas kol olam kul ketzipor. In other words, the birds fly in the sky over the entire world, and so too, this image controls the entire world. And kadur refers to the sphere of the earth. Shetofis is atzmo tachas kol olam kulo ki kadur, and he controls the entire earth, and therefore the kadur, the symbol, is the round ball that's in his hand. Tana, we have a brisa. Hosif alem sayif ator v'tabas. Ultimately, with the passage of time, the customs of the idol worshippers expanded to include other objects that would symbolically represent the image as a divine power down here on earth that controls the world. And those are sayiv. Why a sword? Meikara, Savra, listed Bialma. Initially, they didn't assume that the image of holding onto a sword indicates its control over the earth. They thought, you know what? This is not an object of worship. This is a bandit. They made an image of a bandit. But then they realized that the sword in the hands of this image indicates that the image is going to destroy the entire world. Atara, okay, a fancy crown. Make so So originally they thought the crown in the hands of the uh, of the image is only indicative of the kind of work that he does. He symbolizes a wreath maker who makes wreaths, from which they make these crowns. So that's called Meikara Savar Godil Kolil Bialm. But Levasov Savar, eventually what they understood was Katara Lemel, that they're crowning this image like the crown of a king, which indicates his dominion over the universe, and therefore we assume for sure, even according to Rabbanan of Meir, that this was worship. And finally, Tabas, Meikara Savar Ish Tayama Bialma. Okay, what happens is if you appoint an agent to do business on your behalf, you give him your signet ring. That's called the chasima, so that he is now authorized. It's like how you say in English, yipui koach, power of attorney, that he has power of attorney to represent you in legal matters, and he stamps it. That was the idea of the image with the tabas. However, they understood eventually shechosem es atzmo tachas kol, that he puts a seal on any decision that he makes this image, and he has dominion over the entire earth. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, any image. How far did Rav Shimon Gamliel go? Any piece of turd that they put, pardon the expression, in the hands of this image indicates that he is a worshipped divine idol. Tana, afilu tzrar. Even if they put a pebble, afilu kisam, they put a little slice of wood in his hands, it's also by no according to Rav Shimon Gamliel. And the reason for that is that they're saying that in the hands of this idol, of this deity, the entire world is like a piece of a chip of wood or like a pebble. So Gemara asks, how far does Rav Shimon Gamliel go? Afilu boy Ravashi Tofas biyalu tsoamau. What if they put a piece of? I don't want to say it. Although somebody told me it's already in the dictionaries, but it's a word that starts with an S and ends with a T. I don't want to say it. But they put some feces in his hands. I mean, isn't that like a kind of insult to an image? That doesn't tell you that the image is is an idol. Me Amrinon says from Ashi, I'm going to analyze myself. Should we say that Kuliyama Zilu Biape Kitzoa? The entire world for this image, this divine idol, is like a piece of turd. It's like it's Soa Bialma. It's nothing. The world is nothing for him. He controls the entire world. Oh, Dilma, perhaps who miu de zil biapi Kuliyama Kitzoa. On the contrary, they had an image of somebody that the whole world held in contempt, and they considered him to be a piece of turd. Teku. Right, this leads us to the Mishnah and the sugya of Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. Hamotze shivrei tzlamim. Okay. Now, by way of introduction to this sugya that we're about to embark upon, we have to know the difference between, let's call them, in the Gemara's language, the difference between Avoda Zara and Slumim. So if we translate these words into English, then Avoda Zara are idols and Slumim are images. What's the difference between an idol and an image? Again, in halachic terms, I'm not talking about Merriam-Webster dictionary. An idol, otherwise known as Avodah Zara, was already worshipped in the past. We have no doubt about it. A tselem could have been, number one, something that was done for beauty. Number two, even if it was done for future worship, has not been worshipped yet. And now we're going to talk about Shivrei Tzlamim. So again, we're still talking about images. The Gemara is going to extrapolate it and by analogy extend the halacha to to even Avodah Zara that we know is worshipped, but it's shvarim. It's been broken. It's shattered. Harelu mutarim. Why are these images mutter? Because even on the tzad, let's say even according to a mayor that we have to be choshish that it was worship, but since it's broken into pieces, that's not a result of the lack of care or how do you say shmirah of protection that he messed up and he didn't give enough protection for the idol, but rather it's because he decided that he's finished with this idol. He's going on to a higher idol. So he takes this idol and he smashes it. That's called beetle. So the key word for as the entire balance of our daf for today is beetle. Now, beetle in English would be translated as annulment. Like, for example, in chametz, you can annul the chametz through bittul, and in avodah zara, you annul the avodah zara through bittul. And by the way, bittul doesn't mean that he has to take the idol and just smash it into smithereens, into small pieces. Even if he chips away at the idol and he removes, like one part of the idol, that's bittul. And bittul, believe it or not, is a matir, and it permits something that was worshipped that 5 minutes ago it was asur hana with two lavim, and now it's mutter because the akum could be mavatel the avodah zarah. Matzah tavnis yad o tavnis regel harei l'asur mipnei shekayotze bohen nevad. What if he finds an arm or a leg? That image, l'chora, is a broken part of a larger image. And therefore, again, it should come under the halacha bittul of shivrei tzlamim. No. The Mishnah says, harei l'asurim. Why? Because they indicate a tremendous amount of honor for this arm or for this leg, and they worship it. Amar Shmuel, afilu shivrei avodas kol chavim. Shmuel breaks new ground. He says, even though the Mishnah is talking about shivrei tzlamim, which means that, number one, we don't even know if this image was definitely ever worshipped, and number two, now it's smashed into pieces. Says Shmuel, the same halach will apply. The question is why the Mishnah didn't mention this chiddush, even in the case of avodas kol chavim, meaning even in the case of an idol that we know for sure was worshipped. Once it's broken, we have a right to assume that there was bittul. And I'm not sure what Shmuel means here. Does it mean that, it didn't fall off a ledge and break on its own? Or maybe Shmuel says, even if it broke on its own, that's bittul, because if this idol can't protect itself, I'm thinking of Terach with the idols, then it certainly is not a deity. A deity can protect itself. Frek the Gemara v'anan tanan shivrei tzlamim. Why didn't the Mishnah tell me a bigger chiddush that even shivrei avodas kol chavim is mutter? Gemara says no. Who had din according to Shmuel? The same din applies. Afilu shivrei avodas kol chavim v'hadik tani shivrei tzlamim. So why didn't the Mishnah tell me a bigger chiddush that even if we're certain beyond the shadow of a doubt that this image was worshipped in the past, still if it's now broken into pieces, it's mutter? Why did the Mishnah limit itself to the case of tzlamim? At Tselem, we don't know if it was ever worshipped. And the answer is Mishkum to Kabbalah Misnei Seifa. This is to set the symmetry for the Seifa, the framework for the Seifa. Matzah tavnis yad tavnis regel alei l'asur mipnei shekayotze bohen nevad. Don't think that a tavnis yad or a tavnis regel is a case where it's awesome because we know for a fact certainly that it was worshipped in the past. Even if we don't know it was worshipped in the past, we have reason to believe through circumstantial evidence. We'll soon see that they put up this arm or this leg on a pedestal. We'll go through that later. And therefore we assume it was worshipped and it's asur b'hana. But if the Mishnah would have mentioned the case of shivrei avodas kol chavim, then we would have had a havamina to say that the only reason why in the Mishnah and the Sefer, in the case of a regel or a yad, you are osabano, is only because we know that on one occasion it was worship. So the Mishnah wants to mechadish that in the case of a regel and a yad. Oh. So again, had the Mishnah wanted to tell me the greater chiddush in the Reisha, we would have lost something in understanding the Sefer. Okay. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Matzah Tavnis Yad, Tavnis Regel, Arela Surah. Bo never. Right? Because these are the kind of objects that, generally speaking, they worship, they hold it. So am I. The Gemara says, Hashvar Minu. Don't we assume that this regel or this yad is a broken fragment from an image and therefore it should be mutter? How do you know that they held this regel or yad in tremendous respect and therefore we assume it was worshipped?